Welcome, everybody, to this live broadcast of the Growing People podcast. We are going to spend some time talking about coaching and rapport. And just a reminder, the Growing People podcast is all about figuring out how to help people in groups grow and continue to grow. So let's dive in here. My name is John Losey, and I host this podcast. And today we're going to spend some more time talking with Fred Harburg about growing people, specifically around coaching and fact-based coaching. But really, it's a discussion around how do we connect with people to help them to grow. So, Fred, welcome.
Thank you, John. I'm glad to be with you.
Yeah, now you're always hopping all over the world, doing different things. And today, tell me a little bit about where you're joining us from.
Yeah, I'm on campus at Northwestern University at Kellogg School of Management today, where I'm a clinical professor. I spend about 80 days a year here teaching our executive programs. I've, for 4 years, been the executive director of the Kellogg Executive Leadership Institute, designed specifically for CEOs and their teams and the people who are just on the threshold of entering C-suites. And so I see lots of interesting characters. It's great work. I enjoy it.
So what was that you were teaching this morning, weren't you?
No, I taught on Friday or Thursday, the Indian School of Business. And today I've got a day to do things like this, which is great. And then on Monday, I'll teach our Capstone Leadership program. In both cases, I'll teach a course on executive judgment, which I'm in the midst of writing a book about right now.
I'm excited to hear about the judgment piece. It's a big interest of mine. So down the road, we'll do some more discussions and interviews around that. But today, we wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of rapport. And in your fact-based coaching, it's the F that isn't part of fact, that foundational piece. So let's dive in. Tell me about why you believe rapport to be foundational to coaching.
Yeah, well, I think anyone who has ever coached would probably use the word chemistry. Oftentimes you'd hear people use the word chemistry and they'd say, man, you've got to have chemistry with the people you're coaching or it just doesn't work. And that's, of course, true. But I don't particularly love the word chemistry because it makes it sound very tangible and inorganic. and this is organic chemistry, I guess, because it's much more lively. It's much more human than the word chemistry might suggest. And chemistry also sounds to me a little bit manipulative. Like, we got to kind of get the formula and then I'm going to do something that is maybe not authentic, but to establish, it was actually, I'll probably offend some people here, but it was my aversion to NLP because NLP is very much about, they use the word rapport actually, but it's about sort of tricks that you can do. The favorite trick in NLP is called mirroring and matching. And so it's a well-known fact, I speak with this in this very rapid pace that I use, and I have this New York accent, as you can see.
Yeah.
Right. And it's well known that some people from the Northeast, where I lived for many years, would say, this guy's a bumpkin. I mean, he talks with a drawl, slow, accentuating words. And I think the part that I approve of, that I agree with in NLP and any practice like this, that talks about mirroring and matching, is being sensitive to the fact that people can be very put off by an accent, by the rate at which you speak, and by your body movements. So I buy that. And in an homage to that, I would say that adjusting the tempo of your voice to match the person that you're speaking to makes some sense. And to some extent, being in a comfortable position physically relative to their position also makes some sense. But as a manipulation technique, I'm going to mirror and match you, and then I'm going to get you somehow, catch you, sell you, or whatever. I object to that idea.
Yeah, and just I want to get your feel on this.
Okay.
When I'm talking about when I'm training facilitators, I talk about, and I say this as intentionally provocative, and I say we as educators and facilitators, we are in the business of manipulating. But it's what you manipulate that is the ethical choice. We are about manipulating the environment around ourselves and people, make it inviting, make it uncomfortable, make it where they want to talk and they want to grow and they want to take chances and challenges. But the line is when you switch from manipulating the environment to manipulating the person. And it's that's a blurred line. That's why I love that you don't, the whole chemistry thing, it isn't formulaic. It's not neat. There's a gray area there of building rapport. There are techniques to do it, but if it's all technique, it's dangerous. And so when you mentioned biochemistry, I remember I had my time in inorganic chemistry, but as soon as I got into organic chemistry, the big warning in the lab was now things blow up for real. And so all of a sudden I go, you know what? It is more bio than inorganic because, man, you do this poorly or you try and manipulate people with how you're building rapport, and man, it's going to blow up in your face. It's dangerous.
Yeah, I think you're so right, John. It's really wise. And I like the provocation. I like the fact that you're provoking people to think about manipulation differently. Because indeed, we are trying to influence. We're in the behavior change business. We're in the business of helping people change from behavior X to behavior Y. A coach is in that business. And so establishing rapport with people and ensuring that in dealing with them, that there's a connection. So, our original name for this entire process was Coaching Connections. And I like the word connect. And so I think it'd be really interesting for us to talk about ways that you can develop connection with others. And I'd like to, during our discussion, talk about that. But I want to back up. And you know this very well, having been with me many times in sessions. But I often talk about the mechanics and the music, or the words and the music. And I like to differentiate the two. They have to work together. A song needs both. A really good song needs both words and music, although I love instrumentals as well. But the thoughtful words add something to powerful music to make both a rational and emotional connection with the listener so that they're moved by that music. Great music does that. It moves you. So great songs, they have both words and music. And so I think about the words as the specific method of the technique, the specific mechanics that a person might use, and the content of the coaching. So both the content of the conversation and the mechanics of how you move through, structure the conversation matters. That's why I created FACT, because I thought that was a very logical way of progressing. But much more important is this notion of the music, of the connection, of the interaction, of the relationship between the coach and the person being coached. And so very famously, Albert Moravian talked about communication expert. And Moravian's famous experiments showed that 7% of a message are conveyed through the words. He showed that 38% of the message is conveyed through what you might call vocal tonation, aspects of the vocalization process. Nothing to do with what is said, rather how it's said, pace, dialect, intonation, choice of speed, and so forth, accent and resonance of the voice, and so on. And 55%, he said, is nonverbals. this nonverbal, that we read each other's bodies. Now, Mehrabian's research and his experiments and his conclusions about that have been challenged numerous times, and lots of people have said, no way is it only 7%. And they're probably right. I mean, it's very difficult to measure this. To come up with such a conclusion is really stretching science, I would say. But I don't think any of us would react negatively or reject the idea that the vast majority of a message is not the words that are spoken, but something else. And I call it the music.
Yeah,
and
if you want to nitpick on that, even if you increase it by an order of 3, so it's 21%, you know, it's still significant that the actual words we speak have so little power compared to the intonations and the context and the gestures. And you can see why it's so attractive to try and, hey, how can I choreograph my body language to make people do what I want them to do?
Right. Yeah, and on the positive side of that, I would say, how can you use everything you have, the environment that you have, the technology that you have, your movements and mannerisms, to effectively communicate with another person? And I think that's completely legitimate.
And I think it gets to the heart of what you talk about, where, and you say this over and over again, is as a coach, it's not about you.
Right.
It's about the other person. So if you're using this information and these techniques to make it about the performer, that's a huge difference than to make it about them, my message getting across and changing them.
I think that's right, John. And I think of this more as an act of service. And to be of greatest service, the question is, how can you get out of the way? So if you do have mannerisms that impede that, whether it's in a presentation or whether it's in a coaching, one-on-one coaching relationship, having other people help you observe the kinds of things that you might do or the way that you act that gets in the way of a more positive connection. And so that's one of my favorite questions to ask a person that you're coaching. Am I doing anything that impedes us from making as much progress as we might? Are there things that get in the way? Small irritations, anything at all that I'm doing that might be in the way of this, because I can change that. And I'm perfectly willing to do that to the extent I'm capable, so that we can make the fastest progress possible. So
we know that rapport and communication is important, but why is it so foundational to a coaching relationship or a thought partnership?
Yeah, many people have probably read Blink, or they're aware of Malcolm Gladwell's Blink. The truth is that the world is so complex that all the stimuli that are hitting us are hitting us with such a barrage that we try to grossly simplify things as quickly as we can to be able to deal with all this complexity. Because there's an infinite variety of complexity facing us at any given moment with all the stimuli. And the digital explosion has only exacerbated that, so that it's more true. We're more easily distracted than any time in the world. So, you know, Gladwell talks about the first 4 minutes, the first 40 seconds that people decide whether or not they're going to attend. Certainly, you can see that in the classroom. I'm in different classrooms around the world every day, and people either consciously or unconsciously, and more often it's the latter, have the question, who is this character and why should I listen to him? And they have that question immediately. And if you put them off in the first few seconds, you've lost them. And the same is true in a coaching relationship. That early on in the coaching relationship, you may have more than 4 minutes, but you don't have a lot of time to establish a relationship with the other person that allows the two of you to make progress together. And if you don't attend to that foundation, and not just once, but keep attending to that, that relationship and the rapport that you have over a period of time, even if you win it in the beginning, it can be lost And the person literally, physiologically becomes incapable of really hearing what you have to say, processing, or wanting to communicate with you at a deep level. When we're talking about behavior change, we're often talking about fear. I mean, when we look at behavior, much of human behavior is fear-based, and for good reason. I mean, we have eons of experience that people are out to get us, that there are beasts in the jungle, that it's not safe around here, and that if you don't take care of yourself, no one will. And so we're sorting. I mean, when we sort down, we know biologically, you're the expert on this, but we know biologically when a human being walks down the street that they are scanning other people in the street to see, is it safe? Is this person I'm approaching safe? And they use all sorts of subconscious cues to assess that person. So sometimes that's appropriate. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's not useful. So, you know, we live in a world of racial and sexual profiling, that people make assumptions immediately about people based on race and gender, age as well, and a variety of other factors, because it simplifies the world to solve the one equation, am I safe? It's the one that everyone wants to know. They want to know that in a coaching relationship, am I safe?
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that, as our brains are wired for pattern recognition, whether a pattern's there or not. And so as you're scanning that you're talking about, we're looking for the patterns that fit in our experience to interpret that. And right. With trust, it's not a matter of trust isn't either there or not. It's whether there's high trust or low trust.
Right.
And the idea that trust is in a lot of ways is like temperature. You know, there's no such thing as cold. There's just a lack of heat.
Yeah.
So that's how we measure. That's what a temperature is. And I think trust is the same way.
And anyone who's married knows that the threshold of definition of cold or hot is different for different people.
This is true. But the idea that trust is, if we're in a relationship, then trust just is. It's what level of trust there is. If it's low trust, whether it's actual or not, if you perceive the situation as low trust, then you're going to do all the defensive things that you need to do to keep yourself safe.
Yep.
But you still have to relate. And I wonder if, when you talk about rapport, is it the same sort of thing where if you're in relationship with somebody, you have a rapport, but it might not be very good. So if you have poor rapport, then the person ends up being defensive, that you might be coaching in a coaching conversation, but they're so defensive that they can't open up their eyes to possibilities.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And oftentimes that's the problem in a coaching relationship between a boss and a person that reports to that boss. That depending on what that relationship is like, and also depending on what's in the heads of the two people about authority relationships, about superior, I hate the word subordinate, superior subordinate relationships. I think by far the smartest coaches, I mean, this is not new. This is like 40 years, 50 years old. This move from a more authoritarian style, which was typical of the past, to a more egalitarian style of being in a more equity-based relationship is certainly been a long time movement in leadership sciences and our observation of what works in terms of the engagement levels of employees. That millennials absolutely don't respond for the most part. Again, this is a generalization, and there are always exceptions to the generalization depending on the individual background and appetite and predispositions and learned behavior. But as a category, broad generalization, millennials are uninterested in having an authoritarian boss tell them what to do. And so, as a coaching style, of course, that has very low probability. And not merely with millennials, but with all generations. So this idea of having a sense of trust, I like your word, of rapport, of connection, of authentic relationship, of a relationship that is of value, one in which it speaks to what William James said years ago. James was the first of the drive theorists, preceded Sigmund Freud. And William James said that people behave the way they do because they are driven to. They're driven to behave. And he talked about those drives as needs. People like David McClellan and other eminent psychologists picked up on this notion of needs, that we have need. But he said the superordinate need that each human being has is the need to be understood, to be respected, to be cared for, to be listened to, given a sense of value, that they are of worth, cherished, respected. You might say the word loved as well. And so, of course, we're not talking about romantic love. We're talking about this mutual positive regard, this rapport, fundamental, foundational to a good coaching relationship.
Would it be equivalent to the person feeling when you say they're heard? To me, it's like they know and they observe the value that you place in them as you're interacting with them.
For sure. Yeah, I love the word value, because being valued, that I am of value to you, when I genuinely believe that's true, that I'm of value to you and that you value and respect me, everything changes.
Because I was just having this conversation with a group of, I go to a lunch group every week or every month with a group of bankers and lawyers, and definitely a different crowd for me. But they're talking about the downfall of large organizations, and it sounded like when the focus became on the results, the numbers, the stock value, the profit loss margins, those results, they started focusing on those, and all of a sudden ethical behaviors go out the window. You think of recent, Wells Fargo and GE and other really dominant organizations that became that there's major things coming out. It seemed to me that they focused on the results. And I always, when I work with organizations, I talk the results or the KPIs, the indicators. Results and indicators indicate something, are the result of something, which are usually behaviors.
Yes.
And then you've got to realize it's just not a collection of behaviors, but there are people that are behaving. And when you walk backwards through the result chain, it tells you to start with people and look at how they behave.
Yes. Yeah. It goes back to causality. So, it's confusing results and with the things that cause those results. And it's confusing correlation with causality. That what matters is, especially in this highly talent-based world where we rely on the brains of people to create new products at light speed in an innovation world, that we're really focusing on what matters when we think about these human beings. And so having rapport with those human beings in the workplace, independent of coaching, is just good business, because we know that having good rapport is causal behavior in lifting engagement, discretionary effort, and better results. So, for good reason, this should matter.
Well, and it when you look at leading indicators, lagging indicators, the leading indicator, even when you look at engagement, Gallup and Q12, of the 12 items, there's a significant portion. I think 4 or 5 of the items in the Q12 have to do with relationships.
Yeah,
and
having used Q12 in a number of organizations, one of the really interesting questions of the 12 is, do you have a best friend at work? And people object to that question. Yeah. They go, wait a second. What is having a best friend at work But actually, I love the question because many cultures, many corporate cultures, are certainly not encouraging of people having, quote, best friends. You leave your friendships out of this. Actually, having a culture in which a person is likely to say, some of my best friends are here at work, signifies back to your use of trust to me. That this is a place where there's enough trust that I could find people I'd call my closest friends.
I was using this concept with an engineering firm, and the first question was, well, what do you mean by best friend? Does they mean the desk next to me, or is it, can I walk across? And to me, it really didn't matter. If you feel like the way that any way you interpret that question, if you can say that you have a best friend at work, whether they're next to you or across the way or whatever, that is taking the temperature of how you feel about that workplace,
right?
And whether or not you will offer that discretionary effort. And I think that goes back to, we're looking at engagement for an organization, but does rapport have that individual rapport between a coach and a performer have that same impact? And how does that work in a coaching relationship?
Yeah. So I'd love to answer that question by talking about how would you establish rapport with another person? And then what's the benefit of doing that? How does that work? And how would you use it? And so I suggest to anybody who might be listening about times in their life when they had what Abraham Maslow would call a peak experience. It was one of those moments, Mahalay would call it, you were in the flow. Everything just came together. You did what you did.
Did you just try to pronounce his name? Because I can never do that.
Yeah, it's Mahalay Csikszentmihalyi. I've met him twice, and he is a trip. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy. Has a very dry but wonderful sense of humor. And he wrote the book Flow. So in terms of resources, it's a book I recommend. It's an old book now, but it's the concept is as fresh as ever. And so we'd find an athlete, we'd find a great salesperson, we'd find a great mother, we'd find a great chef, we'd find a great golfer, we'd find virtually a highly skilled brain surgeon. We'd find people who are extraordinary and people who are common. We'd find a newspaper salesman or you name it. Throughout the spectrum of positions in the world, some people do things. You've met a receptionist, and then you've met a receptionist, and they can be vastly different. It's interesting. The receptionist is the face of the company often, the first person that people meet, the person that is their first impression of the organization. And some receptionists are pretty tough characters, and others are intelligent, warm, and welcoming, extend themselves to people, help people feel comfortable and relaxed. And that's a tough job when you have to do that over and over with thousands of people and people you'll never see again. And I appreciate, so it's a job that's hard to do for a long time well, but when you have a great receptionist, wow, what a difference. And so whatever job you've been in or whatever kind of projects you've done, I'd love for you to think about one that you did extraordinarily well. You look back on it and you say, that was good. That was really good. I mean, by my standards, the rest of the world might not think so, but I evaluate that as it felt great. And I loved doing it. I just loved doing the doing of that task. I loved the effort required that led up to it. I liked the way it finished. I liked the way it felt while I was doing it. And I really liked it after the fact, looking back on it. Now, all of us have had situations like that. You've probably had a situation like that today, where you had a conversation with somebody, and if you think about it, you walk back on it, you say, it was really good. You know, I listened carefully to that person. I was thoughtful in my response. I didn't overplay my hand, but I gave them some things to think about that they expressed a lot of appreciation for, and it felt good to me. It felt good to them. It's good. So, it could have been with you, John, a conversation with Pax. I'm sure that not every conversation you have with your young son is one that you walk away from saying, that was good. But on the other hand, I'll bet there are some that very well were great, where there was a real exchange that took place, where you connected with each other. And that's what I'd like people to think about. If other people were involved in the event, in this peak experience, where they gave a presentation, they led a team in a project, they were part of a team in a project, they had an interaction with a customer or someone they served in one way or another, and it was just really good, it stood out to them as exceptional, then I'd love for them to think about how they established connection with the person in that situation. And people do this in a variety of different ways. So I have friends that are great storytellers. And they can start to tell a story and immediately they got me. I'm just with them. So, names come to mind when I say that to you. And I've got people who do that through remarkable sincerity. I mean, their sincerity and humility is so powerful that it grabs me. And as they lean in with sincerity to listen to me, and they're thoughtful in that sincerity, they never seem to polish it one way or another, but say the truth, but in a way that seems really respectful and sincere. Wow, that grabs me. I've got friends who use humor. They're able to appropriately use jokes and poke at themselves and poke at others and poke at me in a way that I feel better about myself when they poke fun of me, and that's an art. But some people are really skilled at doing that, and they seem to break the distance between the two of us by poking fun at me, something that often backfires. And
so what I hear you talking about is, instead of thinking of a mechanistic way to, here's 3 steps to active listening and building rapport, what you're suggesting is, first, understand your strengths, understand what you bring to the table, leverage that, and then leaven it with skills that might fill in some gaps, so that it's really about you authentically meeting that person with your best self and creating that space where you can have a partnership.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think I have overused the term best self. To this point, people are going best self. I've heard best self. But I think, Abraham Lincoln called it our better angels. He part of us. Many people throughout history have. This is not a new idea, but we know that there are times when we are doing things better, more effectively, more authentically, and there are times when we're not as effective. That's certainly true for me. And I think if you can zero in on those times and use what is natural to you, build on what is natural to you, then you have the opportunity to be authentic. And people get authenticity.
Yeah, and we've had this discussion about, do you strengths and weaknesses, and I've landed on the concept that, yeah, let's develop, when we're learning, when we're practicing, work on your weaknesses, but when you need to perform, step out with your best, with your strengths. And the idea is that if you can practice your strengths when you have to perform, you're going to be able to make up for some of those weaknesses because of your strengths. But when you step back, you look at, okay, where do I need to grow? And that's where you develop. I think about when we've led coaching workshops and we send people out, it's fun because we don't talk about role plays, we talk about real plays, where groups of 2 or 3 people go out and really coach each other. And as I watch them go out to start their coaching, The three of them, we sent them out of the room to someplace comfortable, and they're chatting up a storm. They're having a great conversation, and hey, this is going on and whatever. And then they sit down to start their coaching and say, "You ready to go?" "Yeah, I'm ready to go." "Now let us begin a coaching conversation where we will be thought partners.
Yeah.
And they just totally switch out of their natural way of relating and try and turn it into really dry technique. They are specifically the words with zero music.
Yeah, and that's probably my fault, and people like me in terms of our fault, because we talk about our models and our methods and our mechanics so much that people start fixating on that, and they forget that this is fundamentally a relationship.
Well, and that's like I was saying before, that's what attracted me to the fact-based coaching model and workshops and online learning. All it focuses on and primarily starts with the assumption that you got to have music and words, whereas a lot of the other approaches, I think they acknowledge that, but they focus so much on the technique and the process that it's so easy to forget that is grounded in relationships. So that's fact-based coaching. Really, the reason why I think it's the most effective approach out there is because it's always grounded in rapport and relationship.
Yeah. I'm going to have to go because I've got another class shortly that I have to face across the campus. But I want to leave people with the idea that you've heard me say many times, and perhaps some of them have, that coaching lives in the tracking progress with each other. Not, I love the way you say, not tracking them down to see if, to shoot them. But
catch them doing something wrong.
Yeah, but tracking progress with each other to think together about how we're doing. And because that's true, it really emphasizes the long, ongoing relationship aspect of coaching, especially of fact-based coaching.
Yeah. Well, Fred, I don't make sure. Well, I'm sorry, I totally interrupt. You get the last word, and then I'll close things down.
Yeah. No, I merely say if that's the case, if it is this ongoing relationship, people have to want to have an ongoing relationship. They only want to have an ongoing relationship if they know in their heart of hearts, without a question, that you genuinely care about them and care about their welfare and their growth and their progress. And if you don't, you should, and if you aren't able to establish that rapport with them, you should recognize that and stop the coaching. You should say, you know what, this isn't serving you as well as it should. And I'm not comfortable with it. And that's what an ethical coach does. They'll end a relationship like that by saying, I think I can help you. I know somebody who would be, if you want to continue coaching, I think I can make some recommendations for you, but this is probably not the right relationship.
Well, with that, Fred, thank you very much for spending the time. We're going to do this again probably next week. So if you're listening to this, look for another announcement of Growing People Podcast Live, where Fred and I will dive into some more topics about coaching, but it's really about how you become a partner in people's growths. So thank you very much, Fred. Have a great day, and we'll talk soon.
You too. Thanks, John. See ya.
Bye.